Welcome to the Humanity and Inclusion podcast, where we'll be talking about intersectionality in GBV programming. My name is Megan, and I'm joined today by Beza, one of the participants from the Ethiopian context. Beza works for a humanitarian NGO in Gambela and was an important part of the participatory process to develop the tools in this toolkit and to test them at the final stages. I want to give an opportunity here for you to introduce yourself to the audience and tell us a little bit about yourself and the work you do.
Thank you, Maggie, having me here in this discussion. And it was a great experience having you guys, all the team here in Gambela, to have this intersectionality toolkit developing. So since the start, I was part of the process. And it was an amazing experience for me working as a humanitarian here. It's been almost 2 years since I joined my previous organization as a protection officer. So I've been engaging in different activities for the emergency crisis of the South Sudanese refugees. So I've been working there. Since then, there are no set trainings that have been given for us or involving in the intersectionality toolkit or any other toolkit developments. So engaging the frontline workers with your toolkit development was a great idea for you guys to come here and share your ideas, share our experiences. It has been a great journey for me since you guys came in. We know each other. We have discussed a lot to bring improvement in our working environment and such things. So it was a good experience.
Great. So as you shared, we have been engaged with each other around this topic of intersectionality. And intersectionality, just for the audience here, is, it means recognizing how multiple and overlapping forms of inequality operate together and exacerbate each other in a particular setting. And so it's looking at all of the inequalities and not just one factor of a person's identity, which is really important when we're thinking about the complexity of people and their lived experiences and how that interacts with systems of power. So maybe we can start there for this conversation. I have a few questions for you. And the first one is, so can you share a bit about the relationship between inequities and gender-based violence in the Ethiopian context?
Yeah, when you come to the developing countries like Ethiopia, we do have the same common characteristics, like whether we're living in rural or urban areas, we do have so many equity regarding to gender specifically. So male gender has more priority than the female gender, but the society accepts that the male is more dominant. Yeah, we can have that also in the developed countries, but here in the developing countries like Ethiopia, especially in Gambela, the norms, the cultures that we have as working a humanitarian with the South Sudanese, they do have a more related culture with the Gambela people called the Nuer tribes. There are different tribes here in Gambela. The Nuer ones are the most common. Also, there are Nuers in the South Sudanese. So the cultures, the norms that they have is really the same. So when you see their culture, the male dominancy is very visible. So as you can say, the GBV is more concerned on the women's. Gender-based violence are mainly occurred on the women, but we are also neglecting the male gender, that male survivors are not recognized. So I do believe that this inequity is bringing by giving the male gender a more priority and dominancy. They are not recognized yet, as I believe, and as so many researchers viewed, male gender-based violence victims or survivors are not recognized. So the current situations are like this. And as you know, most of the women are facing so many challenges like not getting access for education, not really get awareness about their rights, their role in the community. They are always in household activities, not going outside for getting incomes, involving in work that can bring money to home. So these all factors, the norms, the cultures that our country has demonstrated a lot in inequity for that have a relation with the gender-based violence.
I think that's why intersectionality is such an important lens, because we see how different marginalizations can overlap, and how, depending on, so someone could be a boy who is from a lower socioeconomic class, from a certain religious affiliation that's a minority in that country. And those compound the fact that, and also his younger age. All of those other factors actually increase the risk of violence and the inequities that he faces within a context, not just the fact that because he's a boy and of the male gender, that he somehow wouldn't experience violence.
Of course, you are right, Maggie. So not only girls, all female genders are not victims. So male gender can also be a victim or a survivor. So in this case, intersectionality will be a good opportunity for those who were neglected as a minority or as a considered as a high stage. So maybe people don't think rich people might get raped or be a victim of gender-based violence, or if you are from the majority group, you cannot be considered as a victim. But there are so many intersectionality concepts that we can address, not only the minorities or the blacks or the poors or the female genders. So all the other marriages can be victim or survivor. So this intersectionality has a good thing. It can come with a good approach to address all these issues.
These are taking place actually within Ethiopia, which is why it made it a very interesting case example for this co-design process to bring practitioners working in all of these different subcontexts to look at intersectionality and how it affects their interactions and work with survivors of gender-based violence, and particularly diverse survivors of gender-based violence. What have you seen from your experience on positive practices in intersectionality that you've observed in the humanitarian or development landscape, and more specifically in GBV work?
Actors that are working directly towards the GBV prevention and response, so they are playing a great role in order to integrate this intersectionality ideology in their works so they can achieve their own targets and goals. But most of the practical works are not then on the ground, but there are so many good positive feedbacks like on the project planning, project proposals, and in order to have a great communication with the donors. So it is the main criteria for donors even to they really force organizations to have this GBV intersectionality processes in their different activities, like mainstreaming these GBV programs in their different intervention areas, like having a PAC training and other things. for their employees and also for the beneficiaries that they are having. So even if it's a start for most of organizations implementing here in Ethiopia, it is a good start. If donors make it like this, it was like a criteria for having a budget or for implementing, even relevant actors like UNHCR is mandating these kinds of trainings and program implementing areas. So the intersectionality will have a good progress on the coming new years. So I hope these GBV actors will definitely put these ideas on papers and on discussions to the ground for the people that are in need. So as you have mentioned, there are different affected populations here, like refugees. There are also IDPs. Even there are host communities that live near to the refugees and the IDPs. So having an experience working with all of them, I can say. I have worked with IDPs, refugees, and the host communities. So it will be a good experience. So people are asking about these kinds of issues. You will not believe that, but people will admire having these kinds of opportunities to have intersectionality, not only on GBV, but also in other sectors. But they have mentioned community-based structures. They have been requesting for these kinds of things. How can be a diversified community can come to one point and get every access in every program implementation. So things are showing good progress currently, not only on papers, but also there are things that can be seen on the ground.
Yes. I mean, when we think about intersectionality in its simplest form, it's, communities are diverse ecosystems. People are diverse and communities are comprised of diverse people. So when we look at it in that way, it's about ensuring that no one is left behind, whether it be different sectoral programming or specifically in gender-based violence programming. It's ensuring that we're looking at ways of meeting the different needs and rights of groups, and not just based on their one identity, but on their entire lived experience. And so I'm wondering, you had touched quite a bit on, practitioners and the donor community, and how it seems, it kind of trickles down from this conceptual place, because we know that intersectionality started in this academic space, and then it moved more over into, more of this conceptual idea within the humanitarian and development sector, specifically in the frame of this conversation. Do you think that practitioners, what do they need to be able to do this work, to be able to do intersectionality in practice?
The main problem here is not to process the intersectionality idea for us. Mainly, it's like other than coordination, practitioners or organizations believe that in competing each others. So if you have two GBV actors here in the camp or in the IDP or in the host community, other than coordination, other than planning to do things together, they are competing each other. So in order to show good progresses by their own side, so they try to avoid referral linkage or this main concept for the intersectionality process. So we cannot address one thing by ourselves. So there are so many age appropriate, culture appropriate, gender norm. So we do have so many marriages in this intersectionality. So in order to improve and have this intersectionality progress, we need to work together. So as I can say, the first barrier that we have not to have this progress easily is the thing that we are competing each other to show our organization progress or to be shine out by our own selves. So cooperating each other, coordinating will be a good thing for us to make it through the process.
Yeah, what immediately comes to my mind when you're saying that is kind of we need to decolonize our own minds and how the sector operates in order to really do intersectionality, because otherwise it's the how that matters. And we say this about a lot of areas of work where we see things that are happening in implementation or focused from a programming standpoint. But when it comes to the how of delivering, how are we interacting with people? How are we doing our activities? That's where we really need more reflection in order to do intersectionality in practice, to apply that lens. We also need to think about our own power and our own situation in our interactions with each other, in our interactions with the communities that we work with. So kind of continuing on that, what do you think are some of the other significant barriers or challenges to putting intersectionality into practice?
So other than this organizational competitions or programmatic affect this, our culture by itself has its own trend that comes from the beginning, a process through time. We can change them by awareness or by mass campaigns. I really believe that it will take a lot of time, but the cultural barriers that we have for our attitudes for a specific gender are the other barriers. And other things, our policies, maybe our education or health, whatever you say, the general policies related with the politics that we have, those are the main barriers for, even if some organizations or donors, if they want to work on direct implementing like GBV partners, they are facing many challenges. So the government might not allow them to disclose all the information that they have, maybe for international communication purpose. I don't know the reason, but there are some barriers to disclose these kinds of information. But there are so many cases that needs to be identified and needs to be disclosed for the people. So even if they are disclosed, they cannot get responses, or there are so many bureaucratic issues that barriers them. So our policies also need some kinds of revision regarding our legal policies even. So if there's one survivor who has been raped or have any kind of GBV concern, they might not be get a chance to, even if they go to the hospital, their medical chart cannot be found, or you cannot get them through the legal concern. So the perpetrators might have so many powers and they cannot defend themselves. So related with our policies and our attitudinal barriers are another barriers that can be mentioned.
Intersectionality needs to be looked at different levels when we're thinking about what affects a survivor of gender-based violence. It's not just a one-on-one interaction, but it's the whole system behind those attitudinal barriers and those institutional barriers. There's a bigger picture that's happening behind the scenes that's creating challenges for diverse GBV survivors. And so who should be involved, and how do you think they should be involved?
So in my beliefs, local NGOs or local government offices that really work together with the international organizations, they do have so many powers regarding to get attention easily by the community members. They do have more great roles for having a safety net group in our community. We need to include those local community organizations like we have here in Gambela, the persons with disability, communities with different kinds of disabilities, like we have people even in the toolkit development process, they were here. So involving these kinds of people will give us a great opportunity to safeguarding the community. And the other kind of people that I want to involve in this safety net program, leaders, maybe religious or clan or maybe tribe. So there are so many influential people that can be trusted, accepted by the community. So capacitating those kinds of people by sharing our ideas, by sharing what we are proposing to do on next steps. So having those people by our side, this can be a great opportunity to address intersectionality in our GBV programs. The local community organizations and the leaders, or maybe I can say key informants for what we are doing, want to include in the program, and others, previous survivors. They can tell their story. They can tell their way that they come, what they have been facing. They know every process. So if they're willing to be part of this safety net, those can be uh, a great role in this intersectionality for GBV.
So that was why one of the main process tools that we had developed was around ecosystems of safety and care, because you have the traditional kind of community-based organizations that work with the humanitarian community, but then you have oftentimes these other representative groups that aren't brought to the table and aren't meaningfully participating in the process. The intentionality behind humanitarian and development actors to be able to really engage with these actors as humanitarian development, gender-based violent actors, and not just as advocacy actors based on the people whom they represent. You mentioned diversity within disability, and it's important. There's not just these homogenous organizations, but also there's cross-movement organizations. So when we think about ecosystems of safety and care, safety, we had this discussion when we were in Ethiopia about the issue around disclosure, and how low disclosure rates are for survivors of gender-based violence. And one of the reasons for that is that, if you come from a highly marginalized group in that context, and, even sharing your experience can put you at risk. And then you feel, re-traumatized during the process.
Exactly, Maggie. So what I want to add on your point is that survivors or previous victims cannot be, they will not be willing to come up in front and tell their stories. It's very difficult here in this context. So even if having one survivor coming out and disclose their stories, it would bring so many of them to talk about their experience. So they can show that they can have a support system surrounding them. So organizations are mainly focusing on the direct interventions. So even if some survivor comes and have the short-term response, so it's stated briefly on the GBV guideline even. So survivors have to get a long-term response also, but mainly partners are focusing on the short-term responses. So they will get medical attention, they will get legal attentions, and so on, so on. After that, the long-term process, this victim, she might have post-traumatic disorders, or she might not like the place where she's living. It might remind her of the things that happened to her. But we mainly focus on the short-term processes, and we neglect these kinds of attention for them. So even if the legal process have a good progress in the first, the perpetrators might get out of prison, or they might show up in the community after some days or after some months. So we need to think about victims' feeling after the situation. So also we need to work on our long-term response mechanisms. So this is what I want to add.
Yeah, one of the growing things in this space and humanitarian development spaces in general, but given particular attention within the gender-based violence space, is on mental health and psychosocial support, and that not just being a temporary measure, and not just in specific contexts. For example, MHPSS has been given more attention in displacement, but actually looking, like you said, at the long-term experience. It's not just about the short-term, the act of violence, and then the reporting and moving through the referral process and getting support in the immediate term, but what are the longer-term impacts around not only the trauma of the survivor, but like helping them move towards healing. But then when you look at the prevention of gender-based violence and also the response, those are really important parts to look at as part that they're interrelated, that they shouldn't be treated like as a separate livelihoods project, but that, I've heard from during the consultative process that livelihoods is often something that's overlooked in gender-based violence programming. And the same thing with prevention in general. It's very underfunded, as you said, that there needs to be more focus on the preventing the violence than reacting to when violence happens. So getting into the end of this interview, I wanted to end this conversation asking about the most pressing needs. So if we were to think about the most pressing needs for diverse survivors, and so we're looking at response, but also prevention. So it's not just about the survivor, but also preventing the violence from happening. What are the most pressing issues and needs among diverse communities in the Ethiopian context? So
the first thing that, as you have mentioned as an example, accessibility for health access is the main big issue. Even if health accesses are accessible, they might not be found on short distance for the victims. So at least a person with sexual violence happen to them, they need to get to hospital within this 72 hours or less than 72 hours, whether it's a boy, whether it's a girl, man or woman. So the first thing would be on the pyramid should be health accesses. For survivors, health access should be priority. So health access should be in a very short distance, or might be accessible for everyone without without inclusion. So everyone has to get access. No one has to be left out in order to get this access. No language barrier should be present there, or any other things that a person needs to get at a hospital should be provided. So the first thing that I recommend will be health access. So the other thing will be legal access. So uh, as I have mentioned, the legal policy, maybe it will be direct or indirect. You will go to court, police, through that processes you might get, or you will get a chance and might have charity organizations that work directly within the law. So you might get that. But people don't have awareness about these kinds of organizations. They might expect money from those. Having a lawyer is a very difficult thing in this process. Maybe the government is giving more concern about this one, having a free lawyer for gender-based violence victims or any other. But this is not the real fact. People are asking money in a corrupted way. Lawyers, legal persons, all things are interlinked. So you can we need to work on the legal system. Also, partners should give more attention on that regard. And the other is on the response part. If we are working for the outcome, for a better outcome from what we have now, not only to increase numbers, but to have a brief change, a specific change that is visible for anyone. To bring those kinds of changes, we need to work on our response mechanisms. So responses have to be not only immediate and long term. So we need to consider things in between also. While we are planning for a long term process for that victim, we might have missed a detail from the story and end up maybe the survivor will get another violence in between while we are processing our case after we give a response on short time. So after we don't have a good follow-up for cases, the way we interact with victims and other things also matter. So we need to build trust in order to get a very good outcome on our process. So these three things need to be concerned. The health, the legal, and the response mechanism should be most focused approach.
Okay, well, now I can't help myself because I have one more question, and I promise this will be the last one. Because you touched on the response mechanisms, and one thing that just stood out to me you were saying is someone's waiting for support. So I'm wondering if you could design a community-led approach, thinking about formal and informal, to support survivors, to ensure that they're having that support, not just from the humanitarian actors or the service providers, but also within their communities. What would that look like? How would you involve different people in the community, or how would you engage with that informal aspect of gender-based violence prevention and response?
Participating women associations, like persons with disability groups, elderly people, even adolescent boys and girls, just these kinds of clubs and groups can help us go through in the informal response mechanism. So the informal ways are mainly focusing on the creating awarenesses in order to appreciate and give recognitions for survivors, not to feel guilty by their own, not to feel not as part of this community in their next move. So these are the things that I think to be included on my community-led approach. So having a discussions just like kind of a TikTok sessions with the community regarding to this GBV concerns and other things. I think that would help a lot.
That makes me think of one of the favorites amongst the toolkit was the intersectionality yarn because of its so you want to tell me a little bit about your experience with that?
Oh my God, I was in the middle within the yarn. So everyone was pulling you here and there from until you torn apart. So I feel like I experienced somehow you feel like everyone is taking your flesh away. So everyone has a part in your life, whether you want it or not. The yarn process exactly expresses this intersectionality. So no one can be left out. There's gender, there's sex, there's age, there's marital status, there's educational status, economy, even your residency status, it matters. So you will feel like every step that you are going, you don't know when the time that someone will undermine you or try to violate you. You don't know based on what they're trying to undermine you. So it was a really great experience. So you can feel it like when the yarn is pulling through every direction. I was shouting even, stop, don't pull it so hard. But when you are in the ground and having these kinds of barriers, you cannot say just stop and no one will listen. And as I'm saying on the example, it will not stop.
So I want to thank you so much for being a part of this interview and a part of the process. As I said, the co-design process was really important to this toolkit because, of course, we could have gone out there and just made a toolkit, but it's really important to have people who are going to be using it to design it, for it to be designed based on their experience and not just a small group of people elsewhere in the world.
Okay, Maggie, it's a pleasure for me to be in this part of discussion. Also on the toolkit development, we try to see the yarn process in the other toolkits in the camps. So we have been working with IMC lately, and they were trying to bring the tools in the camps. So it was a good experience also. So I think we will keep in touch and we'll see the further progress of this toolkit.
Thank you so much, Beza.